We're good. We're live. Okay, here we go. Welcome to Viking Voices, the people of Princeton. I'm the proud Superintendent Tom Burton. And typically in our program, our monthly program with the great partnership of ICRC, we're able to talk about the voices around Princeton, the students, the staff, community members, alums, and so forth. Today, it's my distinct honor to host two incredible superintendents that not only doing amazing work within their district, but also doing work regionally, across Ohio, and also nationally. So gentlemen, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. The proud superintendent of Middletown City Schools, Marlon Stiles, and the proud superintendent of Lakota Local Schools, Matt Miller. So gentlemen, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having us. Really appreciate the opportunity. And if we live up to half of your billing, we'll be okay.
Well, let's hope you do. No pressure. So one of the things that when we first started talking about this program and pulling people together was just the recognition that working together, we could accomplish so much more. And especially during this pandemic, it's led to countless phone calls, Zoom meetings, and so forth for not only local superintendents, but superintendents literally across the country. And I'm very proud to also say that this last year was the first year that Princeton got accepted into a League of Innovative Schools in both Middletown and Lakota, and also another local school district, Winton Woods, is in the League of Innovative Schools. So we're very fortunate to have this collection of really great superintendents, probably not me, but at least the other three I mentioned, and coming together. So today we're going to talk about a couple different topics, and specifically what has been done during this pandemic, but then also looking forward, and we're going to leave you with a big call to action. So first, we're going to talk about social emotional, the well-being of each student. And that, for sure, at the onset of this pandemic was the number one thing that each superintendent really was losing sleep over. What are we going to do for the social emotional well-being? So Marlon, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, Tom, first of all, thanks for putting this together. Excited to be here with two of my colleagues from the League of Innovative Schools here in Southwest Ohio, Matt and Tom, Lakota and Princeton. The middies are excited to be here. You know, just like educators across the entire region, the number one thing that is on our hearts, our minds, and our most passionate pieces is to make sure our kids are taken care of, that we want to ensure the health and well-being of our students. We want our kids to be happy. We want to be excited to be at school, excited to be around their friends, excited to be around their role models as they come to school each day. And when the pandemic hit, it really shook everybody up, both adults and students as well. So really our main focus in this region, the state, and the country, just being making sure that our kids are taken care of. The most important thing for us before we educate any student is to make sure that they are healthy, to make sure that they are happy, and they have the basic needs taken care of. I'm not talking about survival. I'm talking about the basic needs: food, water. We'll talk connectivity here in just a second. I'll probably get a little fired up when we get to that one. But from a social emotional stake, you hear people talk often about the whole child. Make sure we educate the whole child. But what it boils down to is all three districts you're going to hear talk today. We make sure that our kids are taken care of. That we are reaching out to our kids, maintaining those positive relationships, making sure they have everything they need to be taken care of, and they're healthy and they're happy.
Thanks, Marlon. So Marlon clearly very passionate about his students, like Matt is, and like I am, in superintendents across the country. But Matt, I want you to talk a little bit, if you can, about the planning. So what did you do at Lakota to kind of make that kind of come alive, if you will?
First, Tom, thanks for bringing us together and for doing this. You certainly are a leader in this part of Ohio, and Marlon, I'm sure, appreciates that as well. So thanks for giving us this opportunity to talk about this. At Lakota, one of the things that the team quickly thought of or came together about on the social emotional learning piece is, before we start even remote learning, we have to talk about remote taking care of kids, and staff members for that matter. And so at Lakota, we made sure that our kids were fed first, that the kids that needed those meals for breakfast and for lunch were taken care of before we rolled out what that remote learning piece looked like in mid-March. And so after that, and then I know we're going to talk about this later, but accessibility, Wi-Fi devices for our kids, and what does that look like? And so those were sort of our two main focuses on that piece. When we talk about social emotional learning, all of that goes back to relationships with kids, relationships with adults, and so I think that's been the hardest part when we surveyed our communities, like I know that you have too. One of the top 3 issues that our kids have is that they miss their friends and they miss their teachers. So that's been really difficult for all of this going on. But and the other thing too that I think helps is when we start school, when we start a normal, whatever that was, school year, we build those relationships with kids. And so the adults do, the teachers do, the staff do, the principals do that. We do that in the beginning of the year at Lakota. First 2 days of the school year are nothing about the books. It's more about the relationship building pieces. And so I think starting out the year that way and then shifting for essentially the 4th quarter to remote made that part easier, if I can use that word, in this whole pandemic. I guess one of the things in terms of planning is, depending on what it looks like in the fall, for either all or a portion of our kids, how do we establish those relationships if we're still stuck in the remote mode? And I don't think we'll be there. I think there'll be some differences, and I think that'll change. But those are the things that the team that I have at Lakota that they're building and working on now. So.
Yeah, so Matt, you brought up a great point about the whole relationship piece and the relationship with the staff. So I know when I kicked this portion of our programming off, I talked specifically about the students, but the social emotional well-being of all staff as well. So the wellness checks, I'll never forget, we're at a food distribution site, and I went directly from there, and a teacher was really upset about thinking about not being able to go back in and engage. And we all got into this business to impact students' lives in person. Nobody ever could have predicted what was going to happen. And while blended learning has been a concept that's been out there for several years, ultimately there's always been that other part of the blended, which is in person. So not being to have that, it was really, the outcomes were staff was they were very bothered and very upset and sad and emotional, just like the students, the parents certainly as well. So the whole social emotional realm really covers the entire educational community. And that was very difficult to manage in general. And I know, Matt, you talked about the food distribution, which you guys did there. I know Marlon did heroic work as well. And, people just didn't think about that aspect of this pandemic. It's, hey, how are kids going to learn? But really, it was about the social emotional. So we did see stress levels that we had to address. And I know before, to both of you guys specifically about some of the really intense needs that our students had. And if it wasn't for some of your staff, some of our staff reaching out on a consistent basis, the outcome would have been maybe really different and tragic. So that whole relationship piece is something we can never, ever look aside. I mean, it's something that's incredibly critical. The other thing that I would just like to add in conclusion to this area is the fact that we really implemented, we did wellness checks and also reaching out and Zoom and all of that, but we were really deliberate, and we started taking copious notes for students. So it wasn't just okay to say, hey, I reached about everybody in my class. We know specifically how many kids reached. I know you guys doing similar things. It's really critical. And by the way, Matt, you guys now are officially out of school. Is that correct?
Yeah, our students' last official day was a week ago.
Okay. And Marlon?
We are all finished. Summer break.
Okay. All right. Tomorrow's the last day for us. Actually, today is our last day, and we have some other work going on tomorrow and Monday. But ultimately, when all of this happened, the whole wellness checks being consistent, I thought that was something that really desperately needed to happen.
Hey, Tom, real quick, too, I'm just going to interrupt you because and you alluded to it. It was amazing to me how much schools pivoted almost overnight in terms of trying to take care of kids and trying to take care of staff. And it was ironic, I think, is the only way I can describe it, how titles didn't matter. When kids needed to be taken care of and needed to be checked on, it wasn't, by title. It was people, rolling up their sleeves and getting that done the best and safest way they can. So, all of us, the three of us in the league, we have colleagues that have been going through this a little bit earlier than we were. So it was good to lean on others too during this time.
Yeah, and then that's the thing that for sure that I've seen, and you guys heard me talk about this on different calls, is just a collegiality and people pulling together. And while we did, I think, start coming together a little bit more when we were dealing with Ed Choice, which we'll talk about later, but it was incredible that, I don't know if you guys had this, but I'm assuming that you did. There are people like that would say, well, what are you doing now that you're on vacation? We're like, okay, all we did was try to reinvent our school district overnight. And I know Marlon was doing great things there. And we're going to talk about connectivity. Both Marlon and Matt mentioned that, and this huge digital divide that exists. And Matt, why don't you start off on that and talk a little bit about what you guys have done with devices?
Yeah, in terms of devices, and two, I think that it's a shame that a pandemic had to happen before school districts were able to shine a light on the disparity between the haves and have-nots, not just with devices, but with Wi-Fi also. But here we are. I mean, all of us on this call have been clamoring for that for about 10 years as sort of almost like a public utility. But in terms of devices at Lakota, we're a Chromebook district, and we had Chromebooks essentially grades 7 through 12 to go home. Sixth graders had those as well, but they kept those at school. And with Todd Wesley and his team at technology at Lakota, we were able to essentially be grades 3 through 12 one-to-one once the pandemic hit and we had to go to remote learning. So for the most part, that happened for most of our kids. For some of our kids that were in grades 3, 4, and 5, their older sibling had a Chromebook. Then we just had those families share, just so that we could make sure that we had a wide enough reach for devices. And so, there's that component. There's a device component for our kids. And when you talk about devices, we all use those now in our roles. Adults use them, colleges are using them, some high schools require them. So we're looking at that as a tool, obviously just a tool. But we have teachers too that have flipped what they do with technology. And so again, the sense of urgency, our current situation and circumstance sort of lend itself to, we don't have an option now. This is what our kids need, and we need to figure out the best way to do it. So I think that's how we took a look at it in my district. And I'll let Marlon you're going to hit some of the Wi-Fi issues, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Marlon. So if you can you kind of take a couple different topics and not only talk about the homework gap, the digital divide, but in terms of some of the work that's been done, what you guys have done with Wi-Fi and really trying to, that call to action that you have about, universal Wi-Fi and what are we going to do to perhaps even make it a utility?
Yeah, I'll start by saying, I'm going to reiterate what Matt said. It's a shame it took a pandemic for this topic to surface and really capture people's attention. There have been different classes of folks across the country and even in our own backyards that have been logged in and logged out. Some kids have, some kids don't. When this pandemic hit, it became very clear that we've got 12 million kids in this country that don't have internet access when they go home. That's a shame. Shame on me for allowing that to happen. Shame on us as a profession for allowing that to happen. And shame on society for allowing that to happen. Tom, you just mentioned words that really fire me up, a call to action. We've got to do something for the 12 million kids in this country, the 1,300 kids in Middletown City School District, those in Lakota and Princeton and across this state that don't have internet access at home. A lot of people talk about this idea of the homework gap, and it's been around for a long time. This idea of equity, unjust inequities, however you want to tag it. There are people that have and people that don't have. And the fact that 12 million kids don't have what they need to continue learning outside the walls of the school is what we define as the homework gap. So Matt talked about devices. You can attach Wi-Fi access to that when the kids go home. Those are two necessities for students to be able to continue learning when they get home. And it's our responsibility as adults to make sure kids have what they need to become educated, not just in the walls of our school, but outside the walls of our school as well. So the call to action that Tom was talking about is it's time for us to eliminate the homework gap in this country. Is that a monumental task? Absolutely. But it's time that we rally the troops together, locked arms, and start kicking down these barriers that kids face every single day, pre-COVID-19, and now that COVID-19 is here. So what we're calling for right now is for the federal government to step up to the plate and issue about $5 billion. There's a B on there, $5 billion in funding through certain programs, E-rate, we won't get into details, but $5 billion in funding to expand home internet access for students across the entire country. We're calling for the federal government to step up and do that right now. To quote the commissioner of the FCC, Jessica Rosenworcel, she said, and I'll do my best to quote her without reading it, maybe paraphrase. She said, if we don't fix this issue of broadband, reliable internet access inside the homes of all of our kids in this country, it's going to create a permanent digital underclass in this country. I repeat, a permanent digital underclass. So we can't let that happen. It's been here for a while. It's time that we step up and do something about it. And I know every district is doing everything they can, right? We're driving buses around neighborhoods and we're asking kids and families to leave their homes to go access free internet wherever a bus may be located. I know Middletown here, we're putting antennas on buildings. We're asking people to leave their homes, find a way to get to a location, a parking lot, to get access to free internet access. We are proud of those efforts, but we know we need and should be doing better. So we are on a pretty relentless campaign to get residential, reliable internet access inside the homes of all our kids. That's going to take funding to make that happen, which is why we're looking to our elected officials, not just in the state, but across the country to make that happen.
Hey, Tom, can I jump in real quick?
Sure, please.
I didn't mean to cut you off. And Marlon, I've been holding back on this one, and I agree with everything you said. And we're lucky enough to have partners at Future Ready, at League of Innovative Schools and Digital Promise that agree with us and push this out. I was on a Zoom, believe it or not, Friday afternoon for about 3 hours with some other superintendents and state leaders in Ohio and at the department. And when I raised this issue, I was surprised a little bit that some people thought that's really not a school issue and we shouldn't be advocating and fighting for that. And I couldn't believe it. I came on with it. I can't imagine, Marlon, if you were on that call, what you would have said too, and Tom either. But what's the response? What is your response, do you think, Marlon? And I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I guess I am. When there are professionals, either educators or legislators, who say, you know what, that's really not a school issue. That's something else.
Yeah, my response would be, when you were a kid, a lot of adults stepped up to make sure you had everything you needed to be successful in life. And right now we've got kids that don't have everything they need to be successful in life. So we need to get over ourselves,
Amen.
Whether we agree or disagree with this whole topic of whose responsibility it is. Get over yourself and do whatever it needs to be done to knock these ridiculous equity gaps the kids face every single day down. Get these kids devices, get the kids internet access so that they can be just as successful as you are. You know, if you're sitting in a seat right now that allows you to be part of that conversation, that means you had everything you needed to be successful in life. So imagine if we took some of those opportunities and resources away from you. Think about if those folks on that phone call that you were on, Matt, if they would have been in the seat that they are in. I highly doubt it, right? So let's do what we need to. It's our responsibility. It's our obligation to make sure we set kids up to be successful in life. That's why we do what we do.
Totally agree.
Yeah, great points, both you guys. And I was thinking to myself as you guys kept hitting all these points and about, you know, it's tragic, right, that it took what the pandemic for us to do things we should have done, as you guys both mentioned. But also, I'm going to just take a deep breath for 1 second. And I want everybody who's listening or who may be watching this in replay to take a deep breath just for 1 second. I want you to really concentrate on what I'm saying. So what Marlon and Matt both said is these are tools that are utilities. You should be a utility, and they are everyone's right. So when we say we want kids to go home and explore deeper learning, when we say, oh, geez, here's this great video, but we don't have enough time in class to watch it. Here's a link, here's a website. We have kids going home that don't have that. We intentionally are driving this gap. Now, unintentionally driving the gap. But I'm going to say this too, that if you are 30 plus, I would say that at the beginning of every single day, every single year, you would get a textbook. and your first assignment would be to cover it with a brown paper bag. And if you were Matt and Marlon, you probably got extra credit points on it. But if you were me, you certainly wouldn't have done that. I had to try to get somebody to do it for me. It just seemed too technical. But the point is that everybody got a textbook. It wasn't like textbooks were passed out based upon income levels or based upon support at home. Every single student got a learning instructional tool, not the curriculum, but a tool to learn. Yet we're not doing that with Wi-Fi. So I know at Princeton, we've been really, really deliberate, like Lakota and like Middletown, to drive down that gap. So on top of our mobile book center going around the communities, on top of that, we've actually taken Wi-Fi devices to every apartment complex, to mobile home parks, to individual residences. And this is what we've said. If we spend $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 on textbooks, why don't we spend that same amount or close to it? And hopefully working with great partners, we're reducing that significantly. Why don't we spend that amount to make that learning come alive when that learning needs to also accent at home? So Matt, I know you asked Marlon that question about, what's the response? The response is, I think all the time is, does every one of your students get a textbook? And if that answer is yes, can they take that textbook home? And I know in some cases they can't, but in the vast majority of the cases, they can take it home. And if we do that for the textbook, we should do that for Wi-Fi. And I know, and for both you guys, I had a phone conference last Thursday with Cincinnati Bell, and been working really hard with them on trying to do some big partnerships. And they've talked to me, and they wanted me to kind of to give the voice of greatly reduced Wi-Fi with no credit checks. And that's critical. With no credit checks, all they need to know is in our districts, those students who need it most, and they'd be willing to provide like 50 meg data plans, which isn't significant, versus 50 gig. I think that's what they said, 50 gig plans. And they could have that data in the house for as little as $13 or $14 a month. Now I know for some that $13 or $14 is still significant, but when you look at some of those plans that we may be able to continue to do work collectively to be able to maybe even broker that down even more. So once I get more information, I'll fill you guys in. But I think those types of partnerships that we have to have, the partnerships again with the League of Innovative Schools and Khajiit, what they've done to drive down those pricing, the individual units, is critical. And speaking of finance, let's talk a little bit about school funding. And back when Marlon and Matt were in elementary school, I'm a lot older. I know some of you are thinking Matt certainly is older than Tom. Marlon looks like he just graduated high school. Oh, there you go. But long before the DeRolf case in 1991, school funding has been an issue in the state of Ohio. And in fact, our school funding has been ruled unconstitutional, not once, twice, three, but 4 times. And so I know we're working on that. There's great legislators that are kind of coming together, cross party lines, trying to come up with something. But whether it's tangible personal property tax and us coming together to fight for that, or Ed Choice to fight for equity there. And just very quickly on that, the issue with Ed Choice is that we all get money from the state of Ohio, and at Princeton, for instance, we get just over $1,000 per student from the state of Ohio for funding. Now, if somebody would qualify for Ed Choice, they would get the full state share, so $6,000 for high school, $4,500 for elementary school and middle school. So that's the really big rub, right? Is that you get $1,000, but then you take away $4,500 or $6,000. And recently I was asked, Tom, what do you think would happen if a school would owe more than what they'd get from the state? And I said, I know that answer. Actually, the county auditor would write a check from local taxpayers' dollars, so levies and all that could come from locally to fund private school education. And so there's a lot that we could go on and on about, but I wanted, if you can, Matt, to talk about the impact of school funding in general. And then Marlon, if you could talk about some solutions or some general thoughts that you had. Matt?
Yep. Thanks, Tom, for teeing that up. So, ironically, when we were in the midst of the ed choice battle right before the pandemic hit, pandemic happened, we have to go remote, and suddenly that's not a huge topic for legislators anymore because they need the schools to provide services for the students, meals, access, remote learning. And so to me, that made a clear message, and sort of they kicked it down the road essentially about a year. Now, with the funding issues that we have now, looking at how the pandemic has affected, and I got to say this, affected our families in all three of our school districts. We have our community members who have lost jobs, who have been furloughed, who have reduced wages, and so that's a huge impact. So we saw that wave coming, and I think we probably knew that there was going to be some reduction for schools. I didn't think it would be this much. Lakota lost $3.4 million in just 2 months. So the last 2 months of school, we lost $3.4 million. Who knows what that's going to look like next year, but I'm sure there's going to be another reduction. And again, I'm very sensitive and understanding to our community members who are in the same financial situation personally, and so we need to see some of that impact, I think. But when we're looking at building out different options for school in the fall, and I know we're going to get to that in just a minute, it's the classic line of do more with less. And so we have people now that are spinning really hard, working really hard on options, safe options for kids coming back. And you can't really do that with less dollars. It's really, really difficult. So I totally get that. But when you have a change, you're making a change like the monumental shift that we're making, to do more with less just makes everything, it compounds everything, right? And so, Tom, to your point about sort of the ed choice dollars and losing dollars in a district and how difficult that is, I think that's going to impact school districts and levies coming up. I hope not, but I know that some of our neighbors are going through that right now. And one of the worst parts of, I think, our jobs is asking people for money. We don't like to do that. We want to focus on taking care of kids and the resources that they need, but it's a fact of what we're dealing with. So we saw a big hit now. I know the two of you saw a big hit too, and we're going to see another hit coming up, I think, in the fall. We're going to have to be responsive to that. Hopefully we don't have employees losing jobs, but depending on what the school situation looks like, I mean, that might be a situation we're in as well.
Yeah, and this is something too that with the whole pandemic, again, trying to be as flexible as possible in not only practice, but in thought, because what we can't do is get ourselves into concrete. And sometimes when we look, just generally speaking, with school funding, as I mentioned earlier, for years and years and years, school funding has been an issue. And whether the over-reliance on local tax dollars because of business dollars going to the state and being redistributed across the state. But ultimately, whatever the issue is, like, we typically are fighting that battle. We're like, you're taking money. And Matt, you brought up a great point, because we have a local business leader that I had lunch with yesterday who was asking, like, geez, I see you're getting cut again. What are you going to do? You must be really upset. I'm bothered by the fact that maybe there's a couple other options that maybe they could have looked at, but ultimately understanding that we have parents that are really in harm's way of losing houses. We have businesses that may not reopen in general. So us having to do our part, this is really the flexibility and thought that we really needed to have. So Matt, I'm so glad you brought that up. Marlon, you want to talk about some salute? Oh, go ahead, Matt.
Real quick, I'm sorry, and I know I keep interrupting, but something that you said jarred something in me. I think one of the things that the three of us do, and probably superintendents in general, is we try to sort of be that buffer between some of these cost reductions, and our treasurers do too. We're blessed. The three of us are blessed with amazing treasurers, but we try to be that buffer for our staff that will fight the battles on the money side, even though probably most of them agree with us in that aspect. But we want them focusing on teaching and learning and taking care of kids and everything that goes along with that. There's one thing that I know for sure. Whenever we're in a crisis, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's in huge budget reductions. Our teachers, our administrators, our aides, all of our staff, they're relentless in taking care of kids, regardless of what the financial situation is, the changes in jobs and roles, or the situation. They rise to the occasion, and they did this time too. I just had to get that in there.
No, thanks, Matt. I know Marlon is going to jump on that as well. And, you know, the whole piece of reliance on staff and understanding and all that is amazing. And we all do the same thing. We will do whatever we can to protect the classroom, protect the schools when it comes to any financial decision. So Marlon, talk a little bit about some solutions or whatever you want to on this topic. I know you have tons to share. Appreciate it.
But I want to talk about trying to get my hair to grow back in, but I don't know if that's the topics we got going on. You mentioned getting old. Tom, if you don't mind, I'd like to take a few minutes and just revisit some of my comments that I shared with members of Congress a short while ago with the House Education and Labor Committee. And I'm going to try to do a little bit of reading here and make it seem as if I'm talking. Tom, you asked us to talk about funding as it relates to education, our districts, and our kids. As you know, in Middletown, we just made $2 million in reductions. That's a lot. We felt that was the best fiscal move that we could make at this time on behalf of our taxpayers, but also to protect the educational experiences our kids are making. $2 million. In addition to that, we found out that the state of Ohio, Matt mentioned this, in the last 2 months of the school year, is making $300 million in budget reductions to education in this state, on top of the reductions that we just made. I mentioned this also. We don't know what the next fiscal year worth of reductions is going to look like for education. So a lot of what ifs right now that are really causing us some nervousness because the impact is on kids and their educational experience. If you know anything about the three of us, we really fight pretty hard for kids, and so do our staffs. We're a little nervous about the impact that these future decisions could have on our kids. One thing I shared with Congress was about the immediate need for Congress, the federal government, to stabilize state budgets. State fiscal stabilization is probably one of the most important things that the federal government can do right now, probably the top priority. You know, you've heard a lot about CARES Act funding here recently. And if you think about that important piece of legislation, it was $2 trillion, right? $2 trillion. But only $31 billion of that $2 trillion was devoted to education. Our kids are our future. Don't you think they deserve a little bit more than that small piece of the pie? You know, if you think about some of the other legislation that's been passed in history, the American Recovery and Investment Act during the Great Recession, that was $800 billion, but $100 billion of that was dedicated to education. That was back in the past, right? So why are this generation of our country's youth not as important as previous generations? That's a question I have on my mind. Another piece of legislation that was followed by the CARES Act was a total of $500 billion, and that was earmarked for small businesses and hospitals. Not a penny of that $500 billion was dedicated to education or our kids. So I think our plea right now for any parent, community member, business member, any stakeholder, any adult listening right now, and even kids that have voices, which are important, I think we call on Congress to provide $175 billion to stabilize our state budgets. State fiscal stabilization is absolutely necessary and critical to protect the education of our kids, number one. Earlier, you heard me talk about the need to expand home internet access. So I'm going to reiterate the need for us all to continue to fight and advocate for Congress, for our elected officials to provide $5 billion in funding to expand home internet access, reliable home internet access for our students across the country. Number three, I think it's important that we look at our marginalized populations and our students that have the most critical needs, and our students with disabilities. Our students who are non-English speaking. I think it's important for us to understand that our marginalized populations are students with the highest needs, that the loss of instructional time due to schools being shut down has a significantly higher impact on these students than they do typical students. meaning that they're losing academic gains. They're falling behind, or that idea of a slide is definitely it's present. So I think it's important that we challenge our federal governments, our elected officials, again, even at the state. I'm going to throw our state officials in this as well, to advocate and fight for legislation to provide funds. And I'm going to reiterate what I said to Congress: $25 billion more for marginalized populations and students with special needs, so we can provide them services that they desperately need to close the gaps that they've experienced because of a loss of instructional time due to schools being shut down. So again, just really high critical areas. I know locally we are stressed about what we are stressed about, but I call on Congress right now to really rise to the occasion and step up, stabilize funding and education across this country in those critical areas, especially during this pandemic, this crisis that we're facing right now, and protect the educational futures of our kids.
Thanks, Marlon. And so let me give everybody watching a very, very specific step that they could take. Email Marlon, Matt, or myself, depending upon whatever district you're in. Ask us for a list of representatives, and we'll give you their email address. We'll give you their address if you want to pen a letter, and their phone number. We all have those lists. We certainly have it available, and you could Google it too. But at least if you do that, we could see that this call to action is actually working. So please reach out to us so that we could actually give you the information. And we want it to come your voice. And so sometimes when we do a call to action like this, people say, well, just tell us what you want to say, and then I'll say that, or a template letter or whatever. This has to be highly personal, like it is for Marlon and it is for Matt and myself. The funding mechanism right now, when you look at the money, and certainly no one can argue with providing additional support for hospitals and businesses. We're not saying we want that money taken away from that. We just want additional dollars for the states to be stabilized financially, which ultimately has a major impact on education for sure. But then also Marlon's great point about the marginalized population and really looking at that need as well. I mean, we're in a pandemic. Like when this first happened, I don't even know if we all could wrap our head around how serious this was and how many different angles it was going to hit us at. I talk about this huge river of this pandemic and all the tributaries going off of it all the time. I mean, it's hard to keep that just going in one simple direction, but certainly appreciate those comments.
Hey, Tom, real quick with that.
Yes.
That I want to say this, and all three of us can probably maybe not verbalize it, but think about this too. And I've said this to some other superintendents that I've talked to, and you two have probably heard me say it. When we went and flipped to remote during the pandemic, I'm guessing, my quick math with the three of us, we probably represent about 35,000 students in Southwest Ohio. And you look at adding how many staff members that is, how many families and everything else. I'm going to remember the legislators that reached out to me to say, how are your kids doing? How are your teachers doing? What do you need to help? What do you need for help? I'm also going to remember the ones that didn't. And so I think those are the ones that did help and reach out to say, hey, this is big. This is big for our businesses. This is big for our communities. This is big for our kids. What do you need to get this done, and how can I help? So I think that it has to be a two-way street, right? It's not always us going to our legislators, whether it's local or state or federal. It's also them coming back this way saying, you guys have a huge footprint in terms of kids and staff members. And so what can we do to make sure that that the positives continue to happen? So
yeah, thanks.
Matt, I'm glad you said that. One thing that I really want to push to while we got some people's attention, especially on our legislators, is we are doing our part to fight for our kids and advocate, have a voice, stand united, amplify what we're saying in a united way. Right now, we need a response. You can only come up with so many creative ways to say the same thing again and again and again, right, on a daily basis, emails, calls, videos, text messages, Twitter chat, whatever it may be. But right now, it's simple. Do something about it. Step up, write whatever it is that needs to be written, put whatever numbers need to be in there to solve the issue and these gaps that exist to take care of our kids. respond, 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 right? Stop listening and stop calling and listening. Respond to us. Do what you need to fight for our kids. And at that point, then we'll all be celebrating.
Yeah. And you have 3 superintendents right now. So if there's any legislators that are out there, and we have invited legislators to join us, and certainly what we're doing right now, we'll send legislators, but feel free to call us to talk to us about how some of the solutions that we have and what we feel, and we could help in terms of getting information for you to put in legislation to be able to strengthen that legislation. And it's not all, like, we all have had conversations before, literally we all, myself and Marlon, myself and Matt and Marlon have had conversations that it's not just about our school districts. It is the global good needs to be addressed, and we can't just say that it's just about Princeton or Lakota or Middletown. And I'm very, very proud, because I know that's not the way you guys think. And many of our colleagues think the exact same way that we do. We have to come together. It's not about one, it's about all. And the more we could do that, the better I think we could drive the change that needs to happen. And speaking of change that needs to happen, we talked at the onset about social emotional learning being the paramount discussion that we were having in our districts. And then we talked about the accessibility and ultimately school funding. Well, many of you may be saying, okay, well, that's all. We understand the realities now. You guys did at least a good job. At least 2 of the 3 of you, Marlon and Matt, did a great job of like setting the table of what has happened, what we're doing. Now we're going to go into the school year. What does that look like? Now tomorrow, and some of this is going to be tape delayed, just let me tell you that tomorrow we should be hearing additional information from the state of Ohio Department of Education, in collaboration with the Ohio Department of Health and the governor's office, on specific guidance on reopening. At least that's what we've heard. So tomorrow being May 29th. So please get that, May 29th, that's what we all heard. So we'll see if that's going to happen. So we're going to take some liberties right now of some things that may happen going into the school year, but there's going to be some very definitive aspects of this conversation that we know will. So I'm going to start off, I'm going to talk specifically about parents. So the parents, you are your child's, your son or daughter's very first teacher. You are the very first teacher, the most influential teacher. And during this pandemic, you've actually moved from being a role model teacher, being a teacher to make sure you're holding high expectations for your son or daughter, to actually sitting down by the desks, the coffee tables, the couches, the bedrooms, all over the place, the kitchen counter, and so forth, helping them learn. Now we know, depending upon what subject it is, you probably did an amazing job. Others you may have had to punt, or you went to Khan Academy or many other resources to really kind of drive down some of that learning. And I know we all have put together resources for parents to go to in case they needed help. But as a parent told me last night, Mr. Burton, no matter all the resources you give me, I don't understand geometry. I didn't in high school. I don't now, and I don't ever. Please just let my daughter come back to school. So we've all had that.
Was that you talking to yourself?
No, actually, numbers and figures are okay with me. It's English. It's a problem. Anyway, I will say that for the parents, here is something. Please don't lower your expectations. You have seen your son or daughter's complete work, and you've been very proud of it. And probably you've seen them say they completed work when they didn't. Holding them accountable on that high expectation as we move into next school year is absolutely critical, and we need that to continue. We had virtual parent-teacher conferences and unbelievable attendance, unbelievable. And if we go in person next year and we have those conferences, the importance didn't stop. It's critical that we have it. Now, if there's transportation issues or whatever, then yeah, let's do it virtual. We can do that. We have seen from a parent communicating with school and school communicating with parents, all-time high in terms of fluidity. So let's continue to make sure that we communicate at the highest of all levels. Parents, continue to hold those high expectations and hold your son or daughters accountable for the work that's assigned, and help as much as you possibly can. And we know it may be a little bit more challenging because you'll be transitioning back to work, or perhaps back to work now, but ultimately that high expectation is critical, and we need that as we roll into the next school year. And Matt, you want to talk about students?
Yeah, I'd love to. And let me start this part of the conversation about the students and starting back next school year with this part. We always say when we're talking about our mission statements, our vision statements, what our priorities are for our kids, the number one thing is always safety and security of our kids. So we did that during the fall, or I'm sorry, during the spring. We also need to look at that during the fall. And Tom, you sort of started the conversation of what the school year could look like in the fall. And it feels like, because things are starting to open back up, whether it's restaurants, businesses, things like that, it feels like we're probably moving, and this is just me speculating, moving towards more of a possible traditional start for our kids in the fall. So I think we look, instead of saying we have, starting at the bottom and saying we have all these requirements in terms of safety for our kids and how we're going to get this done, I think we almost need to flip that and start with, here's what traditional learning looks like. And now here are the requirements and guidelines that we have, so we can take it from traditional down a little bit. I don't want to call it blended. I don't want to call it hybrid. I want to call it traditional with safety measures for our kids, so that our kids and our staff, and I know that Marlon's going to talk about staff, but that our kids are safe and our staff members are safe during COVID-19. So ideally, without exception, I think all of us want our kids back in school as much as possible, but as safe as possible too. So there's that component. The other component that I see is we're still going to have some families. We're still going to have some kids that don't feel comfortable coming back, no matter what protections we put in place. So I think there's a huge opportunity for us to provide a virtual learning environment for our kids, K-12, for the whole year next year, for those that might either be at high risk or don't feel comfortable coming back. I think that's okay. I think it's okay to have that two-tiered system in terms of traditional with safety and precautions, and also a remote learning option for our kids. We don't know what it's going to look like, but at Lakota, that's what we're building out. We're building out traditional with guidelines, and we're also building out the K-12 remote option all year long. And so we have teachers working now behind the scenes, building out something. And we know that our virtual learning environments next year for our students need to look different than what they did in the spring. In the spring, we were reactionary. Now we have time to plan. We have time to make it a lot better than what it was. So I'm hoping we get our kids back. School means a lot to our kids, not just in terms of the academics, but also all the extracurriculars, all the opportunities that our seniors and other kids have lost this year. That's one of the big things that we've heard back from our kids is they miss being in school, they miss seeing their friends, and they miss their teachers. So I'm hoping, really hoping that we get back at it as soon as possible, but as safe as possible.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Great points about the safety. I mean, those are decisions and our plans that we have to take into account first and foremost. And we'll be coming back into our central office, and we'll be doing, we're no longer remote. And that's the one thing. It's the little plans of how often do we clean surfaces and how often do we clean the restrooms and all that is really critical, bringing kids back together. But you know, Matt, when you talked about flexibility without actually saying flexibility for parents, the flexibility really needs parents, you really need to be flexible, because there are so many things. The only constant right now is change, right? So we've been told so many different models, and so it's gotten so much different guidance that we really have to ultimately will make a decision based what's best for our communities, but ultimately with following the guidance from the state. And when we say this is the direction we're going to go, and working collaboratively with many people, but when we say that, we really need that flexibility of thought. We need that patience and all that moving forward from all the parents in the entire educational community. But Marlon's going to talk about staff, and you know, we all, I would say, are very strong advocates, obviously, of students. We all certainly are huge advocates. That's why we got in the business. The staff component cannot be overstated, the importance as we look forward. And I know that Matt is a huge teacher, staff, administrative advocate. I know that I am, and I know Marlon certainly sets it up tremendously with the staff. So Marlon?
Yeah, so first, so I played quarterback in high school. We ran the wishbone. One of my favorite.
Certainly you weren't throwing the ball deep. Right? I mean, I know that, right?
I'll talk about that. I will tell you that. Matt, one of my favorite plays in our playbook was a tight end pop pass. And I know you're a former high school tight end, right?
No, center.
Tight end. Come on.
No, I didn't. Center, man. I was center.
Field position.
He always wanted to play tight end.
I always wanted to play tight end. I could have.
My high school tight end and I, we were always on the same page. And Matt, when you mentioned responsiveness and what you're thinking about in Lakota, I got really excited because I know that's what a lot of teachers, that's their frame of mind right now. Walking into the start of next school year is just being responsive, whatever the kids may need, right? So if they have needs social emotionally, having plans in place to respond and support them in those situations. Knowing that some kids want virtual environments, some want traditional environments, having plans and supports in place to be responsive to whatever the kids may need. But if I give any advice to educators right now, I don't care if it's in our district or across the country or the region, just be prepared, right? Take a moment this summer and get your mind ready to receive whatever type of environment we begin the year in, but also have your mind ready to be nimble and agile enough throughout the year. So whatever circumstances get tossed our way, mentally we're ready to receive those. Know that your districts are preparing strategically ideas and contingency plans, no matter what gets tossed our way. Knowing those preparations are being made, just mentally get yourself in the right frame of mind to respond and bounce in and out of circumstances as they begin to surface and change. I will also say to educators, myself included, embrace the moment, right? We got an opportunity to look at how we educate kids a little bit differently. Thank you to coronavirus for coming to the United States. We've got an opportunity because of the shutdown to really embrace the idea of tweaking or reimagining how we educate kids. So think about some of those scenarios that Matt just mentioned. How can we tweak the traditional setting, but also how can we re-envision how we do education in the virtual lens and everything in between. So my advice to educators, doesn't matter your title or position, embrace the moment and find a way to jump in the deep end. I'm talking cannonball style, right? Big splash, and really shift your instructional practices different ways. Then the last thing I'm going to say, this is for the superintendent at the Ohio Department of Education. Each year, ODE hands out a Teacher of the Year. I'm going to make this very clear. Next year, the Teacher of the Year for the entire state of Ohio should be every single last educator in this state for the job that they did during the school shutdown period here in Ohio. They deserve it, right? Our educators rose to the occasion. They answered the call, whatever type of slogan you can come up with. The Teacher of the Year in Ohio for 2020, 2021 should be all teachers. So I can guarantee you there is at least one application in there in that platform that nominates all Ohio teachers. We want to see that come true. I'm speaking on behalf of Tom Burton in Princeton. I'm speaking on behalf of Matt Miller in Lakota. And I represent Middletown City School District when I say that we want to see all Ohio teachers honored as Teachers of the Year for the job they did for kids during the shutdown. Tom, I'm going to leave it with that because that's exactly what needs to happen.
Thanks. So I wanted to, drop the mic. I wanted to hit a couple quick points about what Marlon talked about and also what Matt certainly hit on as well, that the professional development that needs to happen over the summer and the embracing the moment and all that's really critical. And I was on the stage at Matthews Auditorium the other day and I was tape recording for our virtual graduation. One of the things that I said is, I know exactly if we're able to come back with staff, one of the very first things that I'm going to talk about in my message, and that's going to be that there was a lot of people that had self-doubt. When a new topic, a new concept comes up, it's like, oh, I can't learn that. I can't do that. And it wasn't until the virus that people actually started seeing just how much they could do. We talked about doing a Zoom meeting. I walked past a teacher, I don't know, it was maybe December, and I'm looking at Trisha Roddy, our director of communications, who always tries to keep me going. If it was December that we actually talked to a teacher about that, and there was so much self-doubt, there was no way they could do it. And so we talked about it, worked, and I'm superintendent, I just left it alone. I had great confidence in the teacher's ability. And lo and behold, you look at this, now they're one of the leaders in the district because of what happened. It kind of forced that hand that for all educators, you can do whatever it is that you put your energy to. And we've seen this. We've seen teachers that had no clue, didn't want to learn and whatever. They did great in the classroom, but they just had a phobia of technology, and they're setting it out. They're amazing. They have class dojo accounts. They're doing things that they never thought possible. And that's the message with the staff, that anything is possible. And especially as we reimagine or innovate for next school year, is a student ever absent anymore? Probably not. We can continue that learning, and if they're really sick, we obviously want them to take care of themselves, but there's still work that can be done at home. And we've proven that we actually can deliver great instruction at home. It doesn't replace the interpersonal relationships that are developed in the face-to-face, but an enhancement certainly it's amazing. And I'm proud to be here today with two superintendents that have led the way, not only in that, but many other aspects. So I'm going to give you guys one last word, and then I'm going to close. Matt?
One word? I can't never do word.
That's 7 words.
I'm looking forward to 2 things this fall. Hopefully seeing our kids back as much as safe and as much as possible. And the other thing, and I was thinking about it last night when I was mowing, I can't wait to see the teachers and staff back as well. And I hope we get to have a convocation of some sort. Who knows, right? But I can't wait to see the people that make our kids successful.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Marlon?
Tom, again, thanks for getting us together. You two continue, Matt and Tom, just to absolutely amaze and push me to do better for kids, and I appreciate you both. Tom, I will say this. I'm going to get back on my horse for just a quick second. We got to do something about the equity gap that exists in this country for our kids. It makes me sick to my stomach. It keeps me up at night. I know the kids are going without. And I would ask those decision makers, those elected officials who can do something about it, walk into life in the day of a student who doesn't have what you have. And see if that opens your eyes to step up and do something about the equity gaps that exist so they have opportunities to be successful. So I'll reiterate what I said before, and I won't go too much longer, but let's do something about it. We've had a call to action out. We've unified voices. We've amplified our message. We have standing united to advocate for kids across this country. Let's get the 12 million students in this country, United States of America, this great country. Let's get them reliable internet access inside their homes and a device that they can continue to learn while they're at home. I'm gonna leave it at that because I get fired up and I'm passionate. I'm proud of every single educator in this country.
Yeah, and so Marlon, the home of the brave, land of the free, right? But it is not free for you to be able to access learning opportunities online. It's not free there's so many different aspects of that. So no, you're 100% accurate on that. I know that Matt talks very passionately as well. And so in closing, right, it really was my honor to have 2 superintendents that are doing great work, not only in their district, in region in Ohio, but also across the country. And they are looked at as leaders across the country. So we certainly appreciate you guys for joining us today. The other thing is that, as kind of wrap up with a close, that it is very difficult for those watching. You could imagine how difficult it is to make me, for sure, but Matt and Marlon certainly look good. And we have people that are behind the scenes that definitely wanted to recognize Betsy Fuller. Matt, I know you work so closely with her. So Betsy, thanks for all your work to help make this possible. And also Elizabeth Beadle too, that has done, oh my goodness, amazing work over at Middletown, and Trisha Roddy at Princeton, and them working together, but also all the technology people behind the scenes as well. I have Chris Lockhart here helping, and I know your technology departments do a wonderful job, but also the amazing partnership with ICRC, who's doing all the work on the back end. So Jason, Dudley, thanks so much for all your wonderful work too. And again, thanks for everybody for joining us today. And when we talk about what can be done and when something should be done, I always reflect on this article I wrote years ago, simply entitled, If Not You, Then Who? And while there's a lot of who's here, right? There's a lot of people that could do the work, but the time to act is now, and we need to do that. And with that, again, thank you very much for joining us for another edition of Viking Voices, the people of Princeton. I'm Tom Burton, proud superintendent, and happy to say so. And again, thank you very much to Matt Miller, superintendent of Lakota Local Schools, and Marlon Stiles, the superintendent, proud, as he says all the time, proud to serve as superintendent of Middletown City Schools. So thank you, and as I always end, go Vikes.
Have a great summer, everybody.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, guys.